Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline. I am your host, Shana Terrell, educator activist. I appreciate everybody coming out to watch, our co-conspirators, our new supporters, much appreciated. As always, shout out to the South Bronx that raised me and these Philadelphia streets that made me. And of course, Citizens Ed and the Center for Black Educator Development for giving us this platform to talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work. So today's show theme, we will be talking about building the Black educator pipeline through teacher engagement and culturally relevant pedagogy. And I know that my guest today doesn't need an introduction, but we are going to give her one anyway. Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings is a former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor of Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction and a faculty affiliate in the Department of Policy Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was a 2005-2006 president of the American Education Research Association. Ladson Billings' research examines the pedagogical practices of teachers who are successful with African American students. She also investigates critical race theory applications to education. She is the author of the critically acclaimed books, The Dream Keepers, Successful Teachers of African American Children, and The Crossover to Canon, The Journey of New Teachers in Diverse Classrooms, and numerous journal articles and book chapters. She is the former editor of the American Educational Research Journal and a member of several editorial boards. Her work has won numerous scholarly awards, including the H.I. Romness Faculty Fellowship, the N.A. Ed Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship, and the Palmer O. Johnson Outstanding Research Award. During 2003 and 2004 academic year, she was a fellow at the Center of Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. In the fall of 2004, she received a George and Louise Splendor Award from the Council of Anthropology and Education for significant and ongoing contributions to the field of education anthropology. She holds honorary degrees from Umeå University in Sweden, University of Massachusetts Lowell, the University of Alicante in Spain, the Erickson Institute in Chicago, and Morgan State University in Baltimore. She is a 2018 recipient of the ARIA Distinguished Research Award, and she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2018. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, the notorious GLD. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Miss Shana. What a beautiful introduction. So nice to be here. Always glad to connect with folks from Philly. People laugh at me because I don't care where I am in the world. I will rep Philly.
Yes. Shout out. So one thing I learned when I came to Philly, Philadelphians are true and through to their culture, to their place. They're going to rep and they're going to represent wherever they go. So shout out. Philly has adopted me. So I'm
good. All right.
Appreciative of my Philadelphians and Philadelphian loves. Sharif always says to me, stop telling people I'm from New York. But I am.
We'll accept that.
Much appreciated. So again, we really thank you for being here with us today. I think it's important for us to take a look at with all the work that you have done in the area of education. Please share with us your journey. What inspired you to want to be an educator?
I wish I had a really nice story to tell you about this. But I just couldn't figure out what else to do. I was nearing the end of my college career. I knew the things I liked. I loved history and I loved to write. But I am from a working class Philadelphia family who I knew I could not come home and just say to those folks, oh, I'm going up to my room now so I can write. That wasn't going to cut it. So my friend said, well, you actually have background. You got a major in history. You got a minor in English. Those are things that get taught in schools. You could be a teacher. And I was like, me? I could actually teach? They're like, yeah, you should go over and talk to those folks in education, which I did. Found out what other courses I needed to take, got signed up and ready for the field experiences. And so in many ways, I fell into teaching. I did not fall, however, in love with teaching until I got in the classroom. It was the students who taught me to love the profession. So it's, I wish it were a more glamorous story about lining up dolls along the, stair steps and teaching to them, or making little kids come in the backyard and listen to me. None of that. None of that.
But the reason why your story and the way you tell it is so important is because I think that a lot of times people think that everybody that was in education always knew that they wanted to be a teacher, or like, oh, I'm just so in love with kids. And tons of educators just don't. That's not the story that happens. And we know now, because of research, largely it's because of how it's marketed to folks, right? Like education and teaching just isn't a profession that are marketed to people. So I think your story and how you came to be is dead on. The great part about your story is somebody pushed you into that field. Somebody saw something in you and they said, you know what, why don't you try this out? And I think that that's the amazing part of the journey.
Indeed.
And I always say a lot of times, because we have educators that watch our show, like, who's the next teacher in the classroom? Like, you hold the power to tell that person to push these young people into this profession. And
exactly.
And who was it, Dr. Ladson Billings, that told you to go see the education people?
I can't even remember. I mean, I'm just remembering hanging out with friends, and some of them were in education and were kind enough. Now, I will tell you that my life was deeply influenced by a teacher. Everything I cared about intellectually came as a result of my fifth grade teacher, who was an amazing woman. I've talked about her. I've written about her. Her name was Ethel Ben.
Shout out to Miss Ethel Ben.
Ms. Ethel Ben. Want to be in her room. Again, it's an example of how you think you want something, or you think you don't want something, and it turns out to be exactly what you need. I didn't want to be in her room because she was old. Now, as I think back on it, she's probably younger than I am right now. But she seemed old to me. I wanted to be in the young white teacher's classroom down the hall, because she seemed to be so young and vibrant. But Mrs. Ben had a commitment to Black people that was unparalleled. And she shared that with us. And she was transgressive. Who knew? She was teaching us stuff about Black history. I first learned about W.E.B. Du Bois in fifth grade with Mrs. Ben.
That's amazing.
And she would have one of us stand guard at the door when she was teaching this stuff. And we were supposed to keep our social studies book on the desk. And if the person at the door saw the principal in the hall, they would give us the signal. And we knew what page we were supposed to turn to, as if we were reading that book, which we were not. Because she knew that this was not, authorized curriculum. But she knew that she could not send us out of her classroom without a sense of this important information. I mean, when she said Du Bois had graduated from Harvard with a PhD, we're looking at each other like, she's just making stuff up now. She's gone crazy. Ain't no Black person going to know Harvard. Because remember, this is an era of, indeed, as it is today, residential segregation. I'm a baby boomer, so there were lots of us. There's probably 700 kids in my elementary school.
Oh, wow.
We only had one white family, one, and they were incredibly poor. Now, we had white kids in the neighborhood, but they all went to Catholic school.
Because they had
so here is Mrs. Ben saying, I cannot let these babies leave here thinking they are nothing, thinking they come from nothing. And I just credit her for that.
I mean, that's amazing. And again, the whole stand guard, because I'm gonna teach this truth regardless of what's going on. I'm gonna have my plan, but we're going to teach these truth, and we're going to let these young people know that they come from excellence. I think that's an amazing story. I think what's also great to hear is that you were able to have the experience of having a Black teacher. And we talk about that a lot of times because, the state of education, like, we just don't right now. There are kids who will go through a whole K through 12 experience without having one Black teacher. So I think it was amazing. I think that's paramount that a Black teacher was important to you and influenced you.
Right.
But I think in a lot of your work, a lot of your research, you do tons of storytelling. Can you tell us why is it important to tell stories of the lives of educators?
Well, for one thing, cultures don't exist without a narrative. Every culture tells itself a story about who they are. I share with my graduate students the story of the native Hawaiians who had in their story that white strangers would show up on their shores. Now, the story says they will show up in their shores, they will come in peace, we will exchange ideas and information with them, and they will sail away. That's the story. Well, Captain Cook does show up. They're like, see, we told you this was what was going to happen. There is no friction. They're okay. But there's a point at which Cook sails away and then decides to go back. And so when he goes back, they kill him because they're like, man, you're messing up the story. The story not supposed to be like that. The story is that important. So what's the fight that we are seeing about curriculum right now? It's about which story gets told. So I don't think you can catch people's attention without a narrative. Even in the midst of COVID, we are more drawn to the stories of people who have struggled than the numbers. Now, the numbers, that empirical data is the reality. But, I can't get my head around 600,000. What does that mean? But when you tell me the story about a bus driver who went every day, who did this, who tried to take care of his family, and he caught it, and he spent 27 days on a ventilator. I mean, now you got me. So human beings are drawn to narratives, and I don't think that my work is in any way different, except that I just kind of highlight the stories. I've got the empirical data, but I think the stories are much more powerful in grabbing people's attention and speaking to a broader audience.
Yes. And why do you think this technique is very specifically important for Black educators? Why do we need to tell their stories?
Well, and I think a big part of our culture, because we were denied access to literacy, is that we've carried the culture through what Henry Louis Gates called orature. So there's literature and there's orature. Can you tell the story? The most revered people in our culture are, quote, people who can talk that talk, people who can speak. So yes, Martin Luther King over Ralph David Abernathy. Dr. Abernathy his credentials are as good as anybody's, but he didn't have the way to talk that talk. Muhammad Ali over Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier, sort of a son of Philadelphia, but no, we gravitated towards Muhammad Ali because of his ability to talk that talk. So the person of words, has such stature. Go into a Black church. Trust me, the church will not exist without somebody at the center who can really talk. That's the power of hip hop. It's it's the ability to talk
and to tell a story.
To tell the story. So it's been that way for centuries, from the beginning, the telling of the story. Every place I've been on the continent of Africa, I have encountered the storytellers. And the thing that's interesting is once you get there, they find a way to weave your story into their story because they have to explain you. It's like, where did she come from? So now let me tell you who she connected to and who she looked like and who she, And so the telling of the stories are important. Most of us remember our elders, not just based on what they did or not even who they were, but what were the stories they told us?
Yes. What did they say? Everybody points back to, I remember what my grandmom said, or I remember my grandfather said, or my family mantra is X, Y, and Z.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
like you said, the auditory language, what we're speaking. Agree 100%. Now let's get to the topic that everybody came here to listen, like to
Okay.
hear about. Why is culturally relevant pedagogy so important? And why is it important to teach in a culturally relevant way?
So, let me just back up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize when I got out of graduate school, since, sometimes people think, oh, this is work you did at graduate school. No, no. I was finished at Stanford. And
Mm-hmm.
I began asking a different question. Instead of asking what was wrong with the kids, because that's really all that I had been inculcated with as a graduate student. These kids don't have parents who speak to them with enough vocabulary. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have enough toys. They don't, I mean, just a litany of what was wrong with the kids,
Deficit based. Yes.
right? Uh, so I decided to ask the question differently. And my question was, well, what's right with the kids? And what happens in a classroom where the teacher, the students, their parents, and the community get it right?
Mm-hmm.
And, here I have this very small N, an N of one, me with Ms. Ben, with Belmont Elementary School, with the West Philadelphia community down there between 42nd and Lancaster and 42nd and Parish, maybe. That's sort of my stomping grounds.
Okay.
Um,
Shout out to Dr. Ladson Billings Hood. Shout out West Philly.
there you go. So somewhere in there, people were getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
And my fear was that the Miss Bens and the Alice Halls and the Miss Harrises of the world were all dying, leaving the profession, and not being replenished.
Mm.
And with their departure was going all of this knowledge. So for me to even talk about culturally relevant pedagogy, it's just the name that I use to have the conversation with folks, but the people were doing the work. I
Mm.
just remind them all, they're not walking around with a T-shirt that says I'm a culturally relevant pedagogy. Now I said that, and then I went to a conference, and sure enough, people had T-shirts, and I was like, "Oh God, no, that's not the point. That is not the point. That these people were doing this work for a very, very long time, and it wasn't being recognized
Mm.
by the so-called mainstream. So I just wanted to make sure that there was some documentation of the work, excellent work that teachers were already doing,
Mm-hmm.
who had placed Black children as the subject as opposed to the object,
I
who
love that.
saw their own excellence being manifested through these children, who didn't feel sorry for the kids,
Mm-hmm.
who didn't think the kids came without assets and resources, who knew that there was a level of reciprocity and mutuality, who knew that all that great stuff that America loves about Black culture, because they love it, trust me,
Yes.
um, the kids embodied it. It's
Mm.
like, why would I reject the kids when I love this music? Why would I reject the kids when I can't get enough of this food? Why would I reject the kids when I love this oratory flow? I mean, why would I reject them? They're bringing it.
Yes.
So I just wanted to be able to create what I would call a kind of counter narrative to what the story had been, that was essentially nobody can teach these kids. And I'm like, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Or that you had to be superhuman to do it.
And one of the things I thought about definitely in always reviewing your work, and I appreciate you for this. And of course, you have to give people their flowers while they're here. And I want to thank you for this, for being a voice for the voiceless. So, all the things and all the wonderful things that you're saying about our beautiful Black children, right? They struggle to advocate for themselves. So, all of your work, all of your research, all of your books, and the stories that you tell, you are out here being a voice for the voiceless. Um, and a major part of what you do is humanize the child. Like people are able to like our food, like our culture, but then look at the child, as you said, like an object, and not as a person, and not as a human that's coming to the classroom with value. that yes, though we have all these degrees and we went to school, but like you said, that reciprocity, that mutual exchange of always continuing to be a student and a learner, but a teacher at the same time. I think you've done a beautiful job of recognizing and humanizing our children
Well,
in your
thank
work.
you.
And thank you for that. We appreciate you for that very much. So I think a lot of times too, people are trying to get a concrete handle on what you said, which is why you'll see those t-shirts, right? Like going commercialized directly out here. And
Well, it's a very American thing to do, to
yes, it is.
monetize anything. I'm not mad at them for being themselves, but
Yes.
they have to recognize that it's certainly not who I am.
Hmm.
And I think perhaps the brightest of our culture has figured out how to merge the two. You know, that's Jay-Z. It's like, oh, y'all like salesmanship, huh? I just gotta get me a better product out here. Okay, I'm gonna sell some cologne because y'all like
I like
salesmanship.
that.
I'm gonna stop selling this reefer over here. I'm gonna sell some cologne.
But you telling the truth.
Right, and it's like, okay, and that's really what human beings do to flourish. They select the best of whatever they encounter.
Hmm.
And we've been masterful at making over something that might have been meant to work against us
Hmm.
as a way to really celebrate us.
Yes. Always. Black people are so resourceful in that way. You want to hurt us with this? We're going to take it and remix it and make it a resource.
There you go.
Okay.
There you
We are going to strive. We are going to struggle through this. We are going to prevail. That is like at the heart of just how Black people persevere through America. Like it just is. Um, but something great I want to point out that you said, which I think is wonderful. Um, Culturally relevant pedagogy incorporates, especially for Black children, just the art of Black teaching. So these wonderful folks that you encountered, Ms. Ben, and all these other teachers that had been existing, and you taking and compiling that research and putting it together. And like you said, I just put a name on it. Folks are already doing this out here. But just the art of Black teaching and people who care and invest and are invested in Black children in the work that they do. Um, for some more concrete, folks would love to hear, what does culturally relevant teaching look like in a classroom for Black children?
So I'm very careful about not making it prescriptive
Mm-hmm.
because we all have to bring our whole selves to the work. We all have to insert our personalities. So the minute you tell me I have to do it exactly like this, as a Black person, I'm predisposed to changing it up some kind of way. I tell the story of in the Dream Keepers. I tell a story about the girls at one of the schools. They required uniforms,
Mm-hmm.
and the kids were resistant to them. I mean, we're talking late 80s, early 90s, right? So, but the uniforms were for the girls were gray and red jumpers, white blouses. You could wear a white blouse, a red blouse, or a gray blouse, and
Mm-hmm.
you could wear white socks, red socks, or gray socks. All right. And I'll never forget going on the campus of one of the schools, and here's this little girl. She is in uniform, but she got on one white sock and one red sock. I'm like,
Ah,
see, y'all didn't specify.
yeah,
Y'all didn't specify. So she done mixed this up.
that
Then I
thing.
started seeing girls with one knee sock and one ankle
Ooh.
sock. I'm like, come on, y'all. Then I started seeing people with two socks on one, like the red one be on the top, but the gray one was on the bottom. I'm like, see how we do it.
Yeah,
I know they had in mind this is what the uniform is supposed to do. They're still within the lines,
yeah.
but they will come all the way to the edge to make it as I think Wade Boykin talks about this notion of expressively individual. And what does he mean by that? It's like when you go to church and Sister So-and-so got the same hat that Sister So-and-so had on, but they don't look the same because the way they wear them. Somebody got it cocked that way, but the other
Right.
person got it cocked this way. It's like, oh, is that even the same hat?
Yeah.
That's something so characteristic of our culture.
Yes.
And so I think that's the kind of thing, that people are looking for a recipe. I don't have one. I do have some tenets And those tenets are number one, student learning. Okay. The kids have to learn. I mean, that's what you're getting paid to do. You know, it's not all about let's get in a room and have this kumbaya moment. That's not it at all. You have to be able to demonstrate that where students started in the fall and where they end up the following spring are different places. Okay, so that we aren't even going to argue about that. I will say that that doesn't necessarily mean where they show up on a standardized test. I'm talking about young people's growth. Did you come into my room, my fifth grade room, reading at the second grade, but left my room reading at the fourth grade? Then we've been able to do 2 years worth of work, even though when you take the test, you're not going to show up that well because you're not going to be at the fifth grade, but you will have grown 2 years. So student learning is first and foremost. Second is this notion of what I call cultural competence. And it's probably the most misunderstood of the three tenets, because I think people think they have to teach the kids the culture they already know. You didn't have to teach me how to speak Black English, okay? You just have to not denigrate me because I use it, okay? You have to not derogate my language. You have to not tell me that it's a corruption. You have to not tell me that my big mama don't speak right. I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to learn enough of the language that I'm bringing to help me in the process of translation. So what I'm talking about when I say cultural competence is helping kids to celebrate and understand the culture they bring with them, but helping them develop fluency in a culture beyond themselves. It's what Rudine Sims Bishop, formerly of Ohio State, used to call giving kids mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. The mirrors that they should be able to pick up books and curricular and material and see themselves. They should have a window when they pick this information up so that they can see a wider world. But they ought to have a sliding glass door to help them get between the two places.
I love that.
It's like the face I got to have on when I roll back into West Philly. Okay. Don't nobody want to hear about no theory in West Philly. Okay.
No numbers.
No, they want to hear about, girl, you still got that good job. Okay. What you doing with your money? I mean, that's the sliding glass door. I can't stand there and say, well, that's rude. You shouldn't talk about that. We want our kids to have that facility, right? So that's the cultural competence. And then the third component is the most ignored. And that is what I would call the socio-political or the critical consciousness. It's, for shorthand, I call it the so what factor. You're teaching something and the kids are like, well, why we got to learn this? So what? And as someone who taught history, trust me, I got that question a lot. Why are we learning this? What does this have to do with anything? And so it is the ability to help students understand that the literacy, the mathematics, the science, the social sciences, the arts that we are teaching can be applied to help them solve an everyday problem. So for the students, for example, I'm going to be talking to LeGarrette King's folks on Saturday that's focusing on Black Wall Street. And one of the things that I really want to lift up is that Black Wall Street is, what happened to Greenwood is not a one-off.
Right.
It's a pattern of things.
Yes.
So why is that important? Because January 6th falls into the pattern. When people call me on January 6th, and can you believe this is happening? I'm like, yeah. I've been waiting for this, because
it's a matter of time, right?
Because there's so many instances. We go back to the 1700s and Shays Rebellion. I mean, I remember, I think when I left Philadelphia in the late 1970s, Philadelphia had over 250 documented street gangs. And people wanted to talk about the street gangs as a Black phenomenon. I said, you don't know your history. The early street gangs in Philadelphia were in the 1700s. And I'm going to tell you, we wasn't roughing up nobody in the 1700s.
That's right.
In the 1700s, there were Irish street gangs.
Yes.
Who were intimidating the customers of what we now call Center City because they didn't have jobs. So people would go to their merchants and little butcher shops or what have you. They wait outside, beat them up, take their food, take their money. Oh, wow. That's not a black thing. No,
No.
no. So the ability to have students understand that what I'm teaching you actually can help you solve and make sense of a problem you're grappling with today is the third component. So student learning, cultural competence, critical consciousness.
And see, Doctor, the way you do it, right? I think is what makes you so special and super awesome, right? You have the what you would call the, I guess, the academic vernacular to explain all of this, but we can take you and drop you right into a high school classroom, and children would be like this because you understand who they are, you speak their language, and you respect their perspective. And I think that that's super super important. And again, that's just another like I just applaud you for that.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
like because you can talk to folks in high up academics, you have all that, but I promise you I can drop you right into my freedom school right now to talk to my junior servant leaders, and they would be on edge just to hear what you have to say.
Well, that is an honor, and I think part of that comes from when I finished my dissertation at Stanford. You know, my mom was incredibly proud, and she flew out from Philly to go to the graduation, and she's like, "Let me see it, let me see it." She wanted to see the dissertation, and although she was someone with a high school education, she was incredibly well read,
Mm.
incredibly well read, and somebody who did 3 crossword puzzles in ink every day, including the New York Times. I mean, and I saw her reading through my dissertation, but her brows were furrowed. Like, what? What is she saying? What does this mean?
Mm.
And right then and there, I said to myself, I'll never write another thing that my mother can't read.
Mm.
That was a commitment that I made, that I wanted my audience to be beyond the academy.
And again, I think that because your work translates so highly to both, that's an amazing gift, an amazing gift.
Thank
And it
you.
is because it can reach so many people. And the things you say, the work you do is much needed to
Thank
reach
you.
others. So shout out to you. Now, something else that's super important, and of course, we are living in these times where critical race theory is now a buzzword. But this is something you've been on for years now, right? To the fact
Yes.
that like we having this fuss about it in schools, but it's not even taught in schools, right?
Right.
But
Right.
we're like making this whole fuss about it. Well, please tell us, why is critical race theory paramount to teaching and learning? Why is it so important?
Well, I mean, its real utility is a theoretical one. It's a way to help explain disparity.
Mm.
So everybody agrees that there's disparate experiences and outcomes for Black people next to whites and other groups. And
Mhm.
the question is, how do you explain the disparity? Well, from the 1600s to almost the mid 20th century, our explanation was biogenetic. Something wrong with them people.
Mm.
They just not bright enough. Their brain's not big enough. I mean, that we used all of that sort of eugenics language to talk about what was wrong with Black people. So finally, around the mid 20th century, people said, that we can't say that. That's not true. So
Mhm.
then the new explanation became, well, they lack opportunities. Okay, well, how come we don't have the opportunities? So you started seeing things happen to try to increase opportunities. Everything from initially Reconstruction was an attempt to increase opportunities, but you saw the Brown decision in 1954. You saw the Voting Rights Act. You saw the Civil Rights Act. But each of these things, or an affirmative action, and each of these things have been slowly but surely rolled back.
Mm.
So, okay, what's the explanation? Well, critical race theorists say, well, the explanation is systemic. It's not about the individual white person that does something. It's about the fact that that person and I can walk into the same bank and they can walk out with a mortgage, and maybe I don't walk out, even though we have very similar profiles.
Mm.
Because baked into, it's not just about the loan officer, it's about the algorithm that the loan officer is using to make a decision about who is credit worthy. I tell a story of my father having come out of World War II in the 1940s and wanting to buy a home for his family. At that time, the Levitt townhouses were being built.
Ha, that's actually where I live. But go ahead.
Well, you could live in Levittown,
Now,
but back then, Clause 25 said no one who was other than of the Caucasian race, that's the exact wording, could purchase, lease, or live in a Levitt home. That meant that the $8,000 that my father was willing to spend for his West Philadelphia house is the same amount of money that that Levitt townhouse cost. His white GI peer could go to Levittown. It's not that that person was, quote, the racist, but the system didn't allow my father access. Now, someone might say, well, okay, so that was then. That what implications does that have for now? Well, here's the implication. The houses cost $8,000. Both paid the same amount of money. But if you go on Zillow or Reddit or Realtor.com or somebody to look at house values, that house that I grew up in West Philadelphia is worth $93,000. The Levitt house is worth about $500,000. So we got this huge difference in wealth accumulation that has implications not just for my father and that GI, but my father's children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think are important in understanding, you know, would I be in a classroom with high schoolers talking about critical race theory? No. But would I be in the classroom talking to them about, how do we explain the disparity? What's the implication? One of my former students, I have a wonderful former student who teaches in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Matt Cohn, really on top of it. And he just asked the students to go home to determine who in their family who, if anyone, had benefited from the GI Bill. And the kids came back, and all of the white students had stories about grandparents or great uncles who bought their first home using the GI Bill. One young man said, yeah, my grandfather bought his first house using the GI Bill and took the equity out of that and started his business in brooms and he became a millionaire. But none of the Black students had any evidence that their families had been able to access the GI Bill when it, was originally enacted. So it's those kinds of things that you might talk about, not necessarily the theory. But what strikes me as hilarious about all of this hubbub is I wrote my first critical race theory in education paper. I think it got published in 94. I think I started working on it in 92. So I told someone who interviewed me about this the other day, I said, if this is a revolution, this is the slowest revolution I have ever seen in my life. We are 30 years in this revolution. I'm going to be dead before we have anything happen. And I've gotten to the place with reporters that I won't do the interviews unless they can prove to me that they've read something already. I said, you know what? I got graduate students who pay good money for this. I ain't giving this to you for free. Go read something. Go read something.
Something. Yeah.
And usually I'll send them something. I'll send them a piece that I did in, I think, 98 on what is critical race theory and what is it doing in a nice field like education. And one of the first things I will do when they call back is ask them, what's the date on that paper? And they go, oh, 1990. I was in high school. Yeah, you in high school. Okay. So it's an interesting, it really is a distraction. It's not about critical race theory.
Exactly.
It is about how do we gin up a culture war since we're losing on the policy front?
Right. Yes.
You can't fight about COVID because the man, say what you want to about, Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe said, I'm going to handle this COVID thing. This is going to be my thing.
This is going to be my
That's
thing.
What
right.
he did.
That's how I'm proud of my administration.
Then he said, I'm going to deal with the economic issues. Okay, so now people getting checks in the mail. Whoa,
Okay.
Now he's talking about infrastructure, and he's actually got these people sitting down talking about what they're going to do. So he's winning on the policy side. It may not seem like it, but things are moving in a particular direction.
He is definitely making things happen.
I told someone, I said, he's going to be able to do more stuff with Black folks than Obama ever could because of the symbolism, because of the representation. They can't say, well, he's doing it because he's Black. Well, could he be any whiter?
Facts.
So the opposition has decided, well, we got to get people upset and angry about something. And this has become the flashpoint.
Yes, critical race theory. The other thing that I'm seeing too is, DEI, right? That's the new hot thing as well. And folks trying to mesh.
Well, they're folding everything into it.
Yes.
They're making everything critical race theory, which it is not. But here's the part I love. These people, with all that they think they know nothing about adolescent development. Because if you do, the one thing you know about adolescents is if you want them to get into something, you tell them they can't. Yes. You forbid it. I'm telling you, these young people are burning up Google, looking for critical race theory. I couldn't give this as a homework assignment if my life depended on it. But they're all going to be looking for it. Yes. Because now you're telling them they can't have it.
Oh, I agree with you 100% on that. I'm like, the worst thing y'all did was try to ban it, because now you're educating the world. Like, critical race theory isn't something new, right? So,
well, and I'm remembering, you talk about going back, I'm remembering C. Dolores Tucker.
Yes, okay.
From Pennsylvania. We gotta ban this rap music.
Yes,
well, good luck, sis.
I'm about to say public enemy number one of rap, but all you did was like give it a platform.
Listen, it's the most listened to genre of any music. You just grew it for us. Thank you.
All cultures. Yes, you did. You elevated it and you gave it a platform by making it an enemy of the state. Again, like you said, teenagers, we rebellious. Who they saying we can't listen to it? My parents don't want me to listen to it. I need to get into this.
I had a secretary once who had 5 boys, and she said she had one rule in the house. She said, I would put a big bowl of fruit in the middle of the dining room table every week. And I would say, you can have anything you want to eat in this house, but you have to ask to get something out of this bowl. She said they would be sneaking in there, pulling off bananas,
just because
trying to get an apple out of here. And they would tell on each other, Mom, Joey went in there and took some grapes. It was like, because she made it, quote, literally forbidden fruit.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And if you understand the development of adolescence, right? When you say no, or you say you can't, they say,
don't touch it.
I will. Mm-hmm. Right? They're in that stage where they gotta prove themselves, right? Or they just rebellious.
Right.
Rebellious curiosity, that's just what kids do. So shout out to everybody being in CRT. You are making our young folks more knowledgeable and ready.
Right.
Ready. So we appreciate that. Now, in the realm of education, again, there's this whole fight about like banning it in schools. And I'm just like, the nonsense and thoughts of we need to ban it from K-12. Again, it's not even really being taught in K-12. But do you think it's important to incorporate CRT into teacher education?
I'm not sure. Its real usefulness is theory building and theory testing. And typically in teacher education, you don't have to do that. If you actually look at what I taught these 27 years at Wisconsin, CRT is in my graduate courses. It's not in my teacher ed courses. It's not in my social studies methods courses. Now, we'll talk about issues of race and disparities. We'll talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But to say, okay, here's the theoretical foundation you need to understand that, we typically don't do that.
Got it. And do you think that there are ways that CRT intersects with culturally relevant pedagogy?
I think people try to force it.
Okay.
I don't think it actually has to be there. I think one is very much around theory and the other is around practice. I say to students all the time, graduate students all the time, I'd rather there be no CRT than for there to be bad CRT. And to me, bad CRT is somebody who hasn't spent time in the law library, reading the legal precedents, understanding the arguments, before going into a classroom and making the application. I'm actually going to be teaching the CRT workshop with Kimberly Crenshaw and her colleagues this summer, next
That's
month.
awesome.
Because she wanted somebody with an education background to come and talk about it.
That's awesome. And shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. We trying to get her on the show. If you could tell her, come on, tell her you had a good time. And come on, Building the Black Educator.
There you go.
Tell her. But I think I want to lift up two really important things that you said about CRT and culturally relevant pedagogy. One, culturally relevant pedagogy. I love that you said early on in the show, it's not some scripted thing that has to be done. I think a lot of times, especially in my time and working in education and working with teachers, getting them to understand how to create a culturally relevant classroom. Well, tell me what to do. Or you're so great with kids. Like, what is it? Can you train me to do that? And a lot of it, like, I can't, like, we can talk about it. I can give you workshops. And like you said, some tenets, but some of it is about the exploration and the change in your practice and exploring who you are and how you treat young people and understanding young people, right? So there isn't this really defined structured way of practicing culturally relevant pedagogy. So I think it's awesome that you said that. And I wanted to continue to highlight that so people going back to schools and educators watching this show understand, right? Read the work, but there isn't some super prescribed way of doing this.
No, it's an orientation towards teaching and learning. You know, I started exploring the work of a colleague from Arizona State, David Berliner, when he looked at the nature of expertise. And he said, you know, when someone is an expert at something, they really can't tell you how they do it because they're operating on a level of automaticity. So the way that you understand what they're doing is you need another expert to observe it. Because they're just, you know, these teachers will tell you, oh, I'm just teaching. But when I put them in a room and they got to look at each other's videos, it wasn't the person that was teaching who was doing the explaining. It was the other person said, oh, I see what you did right there. Oh, I see this. So again, in a sort of common everyday analogy that I use to explain this to people, I said, it's like the difference between following a recipe and knowing how to cook. So I had a colleague who used to brag about his mother's cornbread, best cornbread ever. So he was going to get this recipe and make this cornbread for Thanksgiving. He going to make the cornbread. So, you know, sure enough, he got it, write down the recipe. And so we come back on Monday. I said, John, how did you make the cornbread? How was it? He said, listen, I got that recipe. I got all the ingredients that she said. I started working. I started assembling it the way it said on the recipe. But she had a line in the recipe that says, now stir till it look right.
Right.
Well, if you don't know how to cook, you don't know whether it look right or not. However, if you do know how to cook, you'll look over in the bowl and say, that look right.
That look right.
I mean, it's that kind of thing. The other analogy I give is the fact that I learned to drive on a standard transmission car. I love a stick shift. Hard to get them these days, but I love them. When I first learned to do it, I used to have to recite a mantra to myself. Push in the clutch, get it in gear, ease up on the clutch, give it some gas. When I tell you I was bucking all around Philadelphia, and you've been on them Philadelphia streets, particularly the ones where they hadn't pulled up those cobblestones yet with the subway, with the trolley tracks.
Yep.
You know, stalling out. I mean, just a mess. But when I really learned to drive like that, if someone asked me, you know, well, how did you drive here today? I couldn't tell you because I was thinking about, okay, I got to go to this meeting. Oh, I'm going to teach this today. Oh, I got to make sure I return this book back. But if you put an expert driver in the seat beside me, they could tell you. They would say, you still making them California stops, you know, which is essentially not a stop, right?
It's a California roll.
You roll. But that's because people who drive standard transmissions have one goal: never be back in gear one. Okay, you in gear one when you start, and your goal is not to get back in gear one until you on your way home. All right, so you don't want to go lower than two, so you roll through the stop.
Yes,
that person could tell me that I wouldn't have paid any attention to. So similarly, when I go into these classrooms, I mean, in the beginning, it was very hard for me because the teachers are so different. But what is not different is a philosophy about how they think about the children, how they think about the work, how they think about their parents and their culture and the community and all of that. So some of them do more lecturing because they're good at it. I'm not suggesting that a lecture is a bad thing. It's bad if the person who is doing the lecture is a bad lecturer.
Yes.
Some of them are much more student-centered and have the students doing the style was not the point. It was what's the undergirded beliefs and thinking about the nature of the work. I was thinking about this the other night for some reason, and it's like, why do we like certain people to do our hair? When I'm like, I'm looking at your beautiful braids. There's a million braiders in Philly. But there's going to be something about the person who you want to braid your hair. I don't care whether they just kind of touch it on the side. There's something they do, or a barber, right?
Yes.
They pretty much learn that same set of skills, but do you like the back and forth that you have with them? Do you like I used to wear my hair very, very short and natural, and there was a barbershop somewhere around 62nd Street called the Bushmasters.
Okay.
And I'm telling you, we would go to the shop just for the show.
Just
because when they would finish with people's hair, people would just stand up and start clapping. Oh my God, you see that? You see that? So it's not that they had more skill, but there was something about the atmosphere they created there that everybody just wanted to be there and appreciate it there. I'm sure there was somebody with a one chair shop somewhere who could do exactly what they were doing.
Yes.
So this is the difference, I think, in the pedagogy, that, people who have deep and abiding belief in the children, in what they believe them to be able to do, in their ability to see them beyond the moment.
Yeah.
One of the teachers used to just crack me up because she'd say to the kids, somewhere in this room is my doctor. I know my doctor's in here. I don't know who, where's my, you know what? Is an engineer in here? I know there is. I mean, just that's the way she would talk to them. Yes. And I'm like, the deep and abiding respect that they have for our children. Now, I'm going to tell you, my own children primarily went to schools in white communities in California and in Wisconsin. Those teachers talk to white kids like that. It's that they don't talk to our kids
like that because of their belief in our babies, in our kids. I, again, appreciate how you broke that down. And again, I think it's important for people to really understand and see it's a mindset. It's a mindset, and it's your belief in the community you're in front of, in the community you're teaching. So that's dope. The other thing I wanted to lift up, people, you heard what Doc said. If you are not versed in CRT, don't act like you're an expert because you read one Google article. You are not in these law books and understanding what the theory really is, right, and having a true understanding of that. Don't even touch it. But I appreciate you highlighting that, because I think the way that it's going around in the media right now is making it seem like CRT is something that's so simplistic, right? Like something you can just open up an article and read about and really understand it. But like you said, you're not reading the legal precedents on it and how they're connecting and really understanding how it's theorized. Don't touch it.
Yeah, so I think I spent more than a year in the law library here in Wisconsin, because number one, I don't know the cases. So every, citation would take me back to something else. Like, okay, well, when did that happen? Oh, okay, I didn't understand that. And I want people to understand that critical race theory is not about your personal grievance. It's about what are the bigger law principles that are operating when this happens. So when people say, oh, counter story, I better just tell my story. No, your story may not be relevant to the principle, the legal principle that's being promoted or violated.
But I think that's deep, because I don't think that people will understand how deeply critical race theory is connected to law.
Yeah, that's where it comes from. It comes from the law. Yeah.
And people hear that, right? Like, oh, that comes from law, but it's connected to it. So you can't really have this conversation about it without incorporating, like, it has to do with law. That is exactly what it's connected to.
And the reason why there's a good connection to education is that so many of our experiences in education are connected to the legal rights we either did not have or that were taken from us. I gave a talk once at the University of North Carolina Law School and School of Ed combined conference. And it actually ended up as an article in the University of North Carolina Law Review. The name of the article is, "Can we at least have Plessy?" So I'm telling you, the educators were mortified. They were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe she said that." But the legal scholars were like, "Well, you know what? Let's talk about this." Because my argument is, I'd rather have a real Plessy than a fake Brown. In other words, if we're going to have them separate, which we already do,
Yes.
give me the same facilities.
Yes.
Give me teachers with the same level of credentials. Give me the same advanced placement classes. Give me the fully resource physics labs and chemistry labs.
Yes.
Give me a state-of-the-art track. I want to teach robotics too. I mean, all the stuff you got, just give it to me, and I don't need to go there with you. Okay.
And that's what we was asking for, right? Like, that's the other part. This is a whole nother show, Doc, but that's actually what we were asking for. That's not what we got.
Right.
So I completely understand. Give me Plessy.
Yeah, give me a real Plessy.
Yes,
We'd be
give
good.
me it.
We'd be real good.
Yes. Not the fake Brown, okay? Which meant, hey, we're going to integrate, and all you Black teachers, you're going to be fired, and we're bringing all these white teachers in.
And the white kids gonna leave anyway. They're gonna leave anyway. So
they're leaving.
It's gonna be Black all over again.
Right. And Black children, you want these resources? How about we don't give them to your neighborhood? You gotta come to our schools. You won't have to come over to us where we want to keep and hoard the resources.
Right. And only you're gonna get on the bus. The white people not getting on the bus.
They ain't getting on the bus. That ain't gonna happen for them.
Right.
Oh. So I have to find that article because I want to read that. So shout out to you. And you picked that title. That's hilarious. I could definitely see through your energy. You are a West Philly girl through and through. So I love that. So many questions I still have left, but I know we are winding down on time. I would love to hear from you very quickly because we talked about Biden a little bit. Just your opinion on, in today's COVID climate, Biden's administrations are allocating, billions and billions of dollars into education. How should we prioritize that money to begin to kind of pay off some of this, what you would call probably educational debt, and other people would see as the gaps?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as much money as it is, it can't even begin to pay down the debt because the debt is started in 1619. So there's not even a number for that. The other thing that I think is interesting is that it's in some ways one-time money. So you can't do it for long-term or sustainable planning. So it's an opportunity to, I think, do some things quite differently. And I actually sat on a panel here locally at Madison for the use of the ESSER 1, ESSER 2 money. And we sent out an RFP to the community and said, anybody, teachers, administrators, students, parents, community organizations, send us a proposal for the use of the money, but it has to be what we call a big idea. We got 366 proposals. Now, Madison's not that big. I mean, Madison has got about 25,000 students in its school district. I think we have 33 schools. We got 366 proposals. A lot of them were good proposals, but I will tell you, most of them were not big ideas. Most of them were, give me some money so I can keep doing what I've been doing because I like what I'm doing and everybody else like it too. I mean, that's like, okay, well, you got money for that. We ain't funding that.
Right.
I will tell you, and what we decided is that we would whittle it down to about 40 to go into a kind of Shark Tank pitch event where we had school folks and community folks who evaluated the ideas in hopes of funding 20 of them.
That sounds awesome.
I will tell you that one of the best ideas that we got came from some high school students, and we are going to fund it. And their idea was to set up a free grocery in their school. And they said, we don't want to call it a food pantry because we know all the baggage that comes with thinking about things like that. It's a grocery store. You just don't have to pay. And they wove in all the academic aspects of it, the literacy, the science and nutrition, the mathematics. And they said that the reason they came up with the idea is that they did not recognize how food insecure so many of their schoolmates were until COVID hit. And that's a big idea.
It is.
Okay. So I'm hoping as this money comes flowing that people won't use it just to patch windows, and paint the walls, but that they will use it in ways that are, I think, exciting and experimental, to try some things that we thought we could never do. To figure out, okay, so when the money runs out, what are the kinds of things we need to adjust about the way in which we've been doing teaching and learning that we learned as a result of having this infusion of the money.
Yes, really work to be innovative, in this space. Well, Doc, we are coming to the end of time, and I always like to give my guests just the last word to say anything to all the folks who joined us out there today. So any last words from you?
Well, I just always like to remind our audience that the work that we are doing, first of all, is so important. And that what we're doing is not about winning. Early in the conversation, I talked about monetizing everything being a sort of thing that the larger U.S. Culture does. Winning is the thing that we talk about in the larger U.S. culture. We're not called to win. We're called to struggle. And so I just would ask people to be fully present in the struggle and to take the long view. And what I mean by that is that my great grandparents were in chattel slavery. I'm always inspired by the work of Derek Bell, who is a sort of father of critical race theory, who says just because something is impossible doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So here I have great grandparents in chattel slavery for whom slavery was impossible, but it didn't mean that they didn't struggle to end it. My grandparents on both sides were sharecroppers. Sharecropping was impossible. You could never get ahead as a sharecropper. You could never own anything. You could never pay off your bill. But my grandparents went ahead and struggled against sharecropping. My own parents were forged in legal apartheid, state-sponsored segregation. My mother could not try on a hat in what today in Philly is called Macy's, but used to be called John Wanamaker's. And that state-sponsored segregation was impossible, but it didn't mean they didn't struggle against it. So think about this. These 4 generations, and they produce someone who was an endowed chair at a major university.
Yes.
It's not about winning, folks. It's about the struggle. So the thing that we are being asked to do is not harder than slavery. It's not harder than sharecropping. It's not harder than state-sponsored segregation. It's to educate our children. So let's just join the struggle. Let's just do this work.
Doctor, thank you for that. Real people doing the real work in a real struggle. We applaud you and we thank you. We appreciate you for being a pioneer, the innovator, the educator, the real person that you are. And as always, I just appreciate you coming on this show. This was so awesome. I can geek out now.
Thank you.
Over. Thank you so much. So again, I appreciate everybody out there watching for coming to Building the Black Educator Pipeline today. We thank Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings for joining us. But I will see